Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm Sarah Condon, your host. In just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-host, RJ Heyman and David Zoll. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. Glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Ooh, Delali. It is good to see the two of you back today. That's a Robin Hood reference from Disney. I thought.
Did you have a stroke?
The fox?
Oodalali,
The fox?
oodalali, golly, what a day.
That's not up there in the pantheon of animated Disney classics. I think that's pretty far down the list. But
it should. No,
wait for
are
the
you kidding?
deep cut.
It's incredible.
Deep cut, Dave. Sure.
It's amazing.
That along with the fox and the hound.
Listen, I like Oodalali. I've always thought it would make a good opening to anything. So Oodalali to both of you. How are you doing in Texas land?
We are good. We're good, right, RJ?
Amazing.
Got through Thanksgiving.
So good.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm exhausted.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did you get through Thanksgiving?
I want to hear how amazing you are, Sarah. I want to hear what, because last time you talked about what your plans were for Thanksgiving, didn't you? So
Yeah.
please give us an update on your amazing store-bought day of thanks.
Yeah, so we went to New Orleans, and as is usual with Airbnb, the house was much smaller than it appeared on the internet. And my dad said as soon as we got there that we would never be doing this again. But we totally.
What do you mean, like getting
hung in
together?
there. No, just like being in a super small house with like a 4 and a 7-year-old. My brother and I are almost a decade apart. So when my dad is around my 4-year-old and 7-year-old, he's like, "You had them so close together. They're so loud." So yeah, anyway, it was good though. We went out, I didn't cook. There was jazz. I mean, I can't complain.
How about you, RJ?
It was wonderful. All my brothers came in with their families, and my mom was here, and so we had 16. We roasted a turkey. I smoked a brisket. We did cream corn for the first time, which was delish. All the little nieces and nephews got together and I preached on Thanksgiving, and I was in church on Sunday. So come Monday morning, Daddy was pretty wiped out. So I've been nursing a low-grade cold ever since. Which is great, but which I think I've passed along to my wife because I'm a giver. What can I say? I like to share.
By the way, thanks for asking you two, but I had a really delightful Thanksgiving.
Moving on to our first article.
Yeah, I know. Actually, if you do have kids in the car, I don't think we've ever done this, but we're going to talk about sex and at some length here because the Atlantic Monthly, earmuffs, little toddlers, the Atlantic Monthly put out a super long cover story called the Sex Recession. And it is really about why is it that people today, especially younger people, are having so much less sex than they used to. But the basic premise is that our culture has never been more tolerant of sex in just about every permutation. But despite that, American teenagers and young adults are having less sex than ever. From 1991 to 2017, the CDC survey found the percentage of high school students who'd had intercourse dropped from 54, get this, to 40%. Wow. That's in the course of 25 years. Meanwhile, U.S. teen pregnancy rate has plummeted to a third of its modern high, what it was in the 90s. Most of us, of course, still think that other people are having a lot more sex than they actually are. And, of course, experts attribute, and the article goes through all various theories that might be sort of contributing
Very thorough.
this decline in libido, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I will. The list that she gives, Kate Julian is responsible for this epic piece of journalism. She says, in the course of her research, I was told the sex recession might be the consequence of the hookup culture, of crushing economic pressures, of surging anxiety rates, of psychological frailty, of widespread antidepressant use, of streaming television, of environmental estrogens leaked by plastics, of dropping testosterone levels, of
chemtrails. It's chemtrails.
I'm so glad you said leaked by plastic.
Leaked by plastic.
I was like, where is this going?
Way to blame the petrochemical industry.
of digital porn, of dating apps, of option paralysis, of helicopter parents, of careerism, of smartphones, of the news cycle, of information overload generally, of sleep deprivation, of obesity.
Oh my God, I need a nap.
Name
Oh
a
my
modern
God, I can't
blight.
breathe.
I know. Name a modern blight, and someone somewhere is ready to blame it for messing with the modern libido. And of course, Exhibit A is Japan, that has the lowest, I think, birth rate in the world at this point, and it's got this whole culture of what they're called grass-eating men, herbivore men.
The worst thing I've ever heard.
I know, reclusive men. It's actually like 30% of young men in Japan have sort of retreated into anime and just have no interest in interpersonal relationships of any kind, apparently. But then you also learn about things from Philip Zimbardo. They talk about procrastination. That's a new word for me. Hashtag. It's which he thinks is responsible for sort of the man session. But let's get to the juicy parts, or the less juicy parts. I don't know how you want to describe it. I was amazed by how many 20-somethings were deeply unhappy with the sex and dating landscape. Over and over, people asked me whether things had always been this hard. Despite the diversity of their stories, certain themes emerged. And one of the themes is that people are just coupling off, not just later, but less. One recurring theme, predictably enough, was pornography. Less expected was the extent to which many people saw their porn life and their sex life as entirely separate things. Not to mention, we might say, just a given of modern life. I'm trying not to talk about the shoulds here, just the what is. An intriguing study published last year in the Journal of Population Economics examined the introduction of broadband internet access at the county by county level and found that its arrival explained 7 to 13% of the teen birth rate decline from 1999 to 2007. So, the teen pregnancy rate, I think, falling is a good for everyone, and I think the same can be said for the teenage sex rate falling. I mean, independent of any kind of theological or biblical concern, I've just worked with too many teenagers to believe anything otherwise. And yet, what's going on behind is that teen romantic relationships appear to have grown far less common, and what that's down to, again, it's hard to know where to start. There's a much lower percentage of teens who go on dates, but they also, there's much less teens who report, things like drinking alcohol, working for pay, going out without one's parents, and getting a driver's license. So people are growing up much later. These shifts coincide with another major change. Parents' increased anxiety about their children's educational and economic prospects, i.e. the expectations we foist on teenagers. RJ, you've talked a lot about this before, but it's hard to work in sex when the baseball team practices at 6:30, school starts at 8:15, drama club meets at 4:15, the soup kitchen starts serving at 6, and oh yeah, your screenplay needs completion. He added, there's immense pressure, one of the young men interviewed for the piece, from parents and other authority figures to focus on the self at the expense of relationships. Pressure, quite a few 20-somethings told me, that extends right on through college. Over and over, one professor at University of Michigan, she says, my undergraduates tell me they try hard not to fall in love during college, imagining that would mess up there's performantism here. Then they say that no one approaches anyone in public anymore. A teacher in Northern Virginia. The dating landscape has changed. If a random guy started talking to me in an elevator, my students would be weirded out. Creeper, get away from me, one woman imagined thinking. Also, anytime we're in silence, we look at our phones, explained her friend, nodding. And then there's those who are so daunted that they don't even make it off the couch. Julian talks about people who describe their sex and dating lives as having gone into a deep freeze as a result of the paradox of choice. That basically there's too many options, or FOBO, fear of a better option, that you don't commit to anyone in a relationship because you're afraid there's a sort of a soulmate out there for you. And then last but not least, a new discomfort with nudity. might stem from the fact that by the mid-1990s, most high schools had stopped requiring students to shower after gym class, which makes sense. The less time you spend naked, the less comfortable you are being naked. But people may also be newly worried about what they look like naked. A large and growing body of research reports that for both men and women, social media use is correlated with body dissatisfaction, and not feeling comfortable in your own skin, of course, complicates the libido. So it's very it's hard, and she surfaces in this this is me talking in the piece, that it's very hard for, I guess, even my generation not to just look at this and be like, oh, really depressing. The degree to which we've prioritized work over love, the degree to which we are living virtual lives that don't involve any kind of vulnerability is not just sad, but it maybe has a little bit of tragic dimension to it. And the people that she interviews seems to all agree, but feel stuck in this situation. So I don't know. Sex is clearly a very highly charged topic, but there's a lot going on here. What do you think about this article, or what do you think about what I just read?
I have several thoughts.
Oh, really?
I do. I mean, so one thing I would say, and I don't know that she touches on this because in truth, this article is too long for me to read the entire thing. But I have experienced some in counseling people that because there was such a big sexual revolution in the baby boomer generation, and sex was perhaps maybe talked about more than people wanted it to be as they were children, and they were perhaps exposed to things that they didn't want to be exposed to, that has added to discomfort. So not to blame any parents out there, but I do want to name that just as something I've experienced in counseling with people. This reminds me so much of a piece that was in, I think, The Atlantic as well. It's been it's been more than 5 years, probably less than 10, about teenagers having less sex, and about how there had been this big response in terms of teenage girls to cling to deeply romanticized, which is not a new thing for teenage girls, but deeply romanticized novels. So the Twilight series, right, was a way to experience a boyfriend that was much safer, perhaps, and based on the information they're given, and that those books, I don't know if you've read them, but it takes a while for anybody to have sex. It also sort of played into this idea that they didn't immediately have to have sex, which, for a long time, I mean, when I was a teenager, that was the conversation, was everyone's just having sex and there's no relationship. And, that was what people were complaining about. And I'm from Mississippi, so everyone was getting pregnant too. I mean, it just, went hand in hand. The other thing I want to say, just from a pastoral perspective, because I think people are going to hear this and it is going to cause them anxiety. I mean, it causes me anxiety, is that, this is going to sound like a should, is that this is something that we should deal with.
Sarah, one of the things she does mention is that the state of sex education is so terrible, and that it either doesn't take sex seriously at all, or it takes it far too seriously. And so all of this is going on, and the pornography especially. No one has figured out the vocabulary. I think Christians are actually some of the only people that have the vocabulary to talk about it, and yet even they have a way of doing it, and I'm not sure the way that it seems to create a whole lot of fallout too. But the refrain that she gets from all the young people is that they're confused, they're unhappy, and they're dying for intimacy, but not able to risk vulnerability.
I also feel like, and then I'll let RJ talk. I also feel like,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sex in terms of being with someone that you're in love with, and intimacy, and sex on an app are like, it's like saying eating and throwing up are the same thing. Like, it's not even close to being the same thing, Yeah. And so, because it makes sense why this is happening, because sex in an intimate relationship requires more of you, and you also get so much more in return, right? Yeah. So anyway,
well, she says that bad sex is actually one of the reasons why this is happening, which frankly, commitment is a big contributor to actual sex being good. But RJ, let's talk about it.
Do it, RJ.
Well, the first thing I just want to name is that all three of us are married.
Yes.
And have been for a significant amount of time. And so I want to call out the fact that there are probably people who are listening to this podcast who are not married, who would very much like to be married. And I just remember a good friend of mine when I was in New York who was single and wanted to be in a relationship and would just talk about how, and had been and sort of in and out sometimes, but he would see couples walking down the street hand in hand, and it just felt like an entirely different universe. And it's true. It's not something you can make happen. That falling in love with someone, being in a relationship is always sort of a miracle and a surprise. And yes, there's putting yourself out there, but even putting yourself out there, like you need to wait. God sort of drops someone in your lap, but in his grace and in his time. And so I just want to name that. There's so many surprising things about this article. I loved when she talked to that professor who teaches the class in Northwestern called Marriage 101 to undergraduates, which apparently is like the most popular course at Northwestern and routinely fills up in a matter of minutes. That people have this incredible hunger, young people have this incredible hunger to learn more about relationships, about intimacy, about sex, about what goes into sort of a lot, that it seems like sort of an undiscovered, strange country. I thought it was incredibly striking what she said about, Sarah, I'm not sure if you got to this part, but guess what year in America was the number one year in terms of the rate of teenage women having children?
I would guess sometime in the 80s?
1957. 1957, because apparently sort of dating culture and this whole terminology of like going steady and having a long-term boyfriend was in reaction to all these men that died in World War II. And there should be being a man shortage in America in the 50s, right? So we think this is that teenage sex is kind of a new thing. It's not a new thing at all. It's been going on. And I was shocked by that. But in terms of the declining rates of teenagers having sex, as the father of two teenage boys, part of me is deeply thankful for that. I do also think that the prioritization of economic well-being and sort of career achievement over relationships is 100% a real thing. Couples that decide to live like a plane trip apart because it's better for one of their careers. The article also reminded me of this series of podcasts I heard on Radiolab recently called In the Know, which were produced by this young single woman, and they're sort of around issues of sex and consent and a lot of hurt feelings she's had. And a lot of times she's felt like, and other women she talked to felt like they had sex when they didn't really want to, but they did it to sort of make a man happy or get him off her back. And it wasn't rape, it wasn't abuse, but it wasn't entirely consensual. And to hear her longing for someone who really knew her, who could read her emotions a little bit, for the space to talk about the sexual experiences they were having as opposed to these one-night stands. And it does, not to sound like super Christian-y, but it makes sense why sex is always best in the context of a committed relationship, because it is wonderful, as you said, Sarah, and beautiful, but it also is complicated. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not good. But to have a safe space to talk about that, like, I enjoyed that, I didn't enjoy that, can we try this? This wasn't so good. Sometimes it's just you're tired or who knows what it is. But that sex is always best in a context where you can have open, honest, safe conversations about kind of how it's going, because that also builds emotional intimacy, which is a huge part of the experience. So I just listening to that podcast and sort of mourning for her, because she wanted someone who knew her in a relationship. She also wanted someone who could read her mind, which, having been married for almost 20 years now, that doesn't exist. Like, you never stop having to talk about what's actually going on. So just to be disabused of some of her fantasies about what the perfect relationship would look like, the Twilight relationship. Anyway, I've monologued for a while, but this was a deeply affecting article.
What was interesting to me in what you just said was this idea that, like, ideally, if people have sex, they have sex with someone that they feel safe with. And in this culture of sort of proclaiming things safe, right? That's a big thing we do now. This is a safe space. People are safe people. This is a safe thing. When that's so often not true, usually safe spaces aren't safe for everyone. Usually safe people, we don't really know them. And there's this I don't know. I'm sure it has something to do with the internet and we feel like we know everyone, but there's this sense of like, I don't know, safety is the new cool. Like it used to be like, you know, people would be intimate because they felt like they were cool with each other. And now it's like, oh, but this is safe. Like we met on this app. We've made this agreement. It's safe. And we don't know if it's safe. It's not safe. If you don't know each other, it's not safe. You know, like it's almost like it's that Aziz Ansari thing where there's like this unspoken contract between people where they feel like, oh, well, this is what we do and this is how this works. And then as in that case, she was so profoundly uncomfortable and felt like everything was kind of a train wreck. And then wasn't able to really verbalize that, right? Except on the internet. So,
well, if anything, it sounds to me like the whole culture that we're living in right now almost seems designed to kill the libido.
It
and
does.
that's a strange thing for also a culture that seems to venerate sex and sexual prowess in a way that's just about enoughness and justification and all the things we like to talk about. So yeah, I can't help but think that, I mean, I deal with all these college students, and it's easy for me as a married person to say, you guys need to, prioritize relationships over career. They look at you like you're insane when you say that. But also, Kate Julian in the article says, well, no one ever died of not getting laid, but they do need a job to survive. And I'm not sure that's actually true.
Yeah,
at least in the way that people think. I think that we push back against that because what we're talking about careerism, not just career or even just the word career, job, provision. That is, it's just a huge, unfortunately, it is a mammoth delusion about what's important in life, as deduced not only from the Bible, but from every single psychologist and pastoral person I've ever met. And that doesn't just have to do with romantic relationships. So I see it when people move out of neighborhoods where they're close with people or out of places where there are great churches for the sake of job, and they become very unhappy because they've lost their community and their relationships. And so as much of a buzzword it is, as much of a sort of a cliche as it becomes in especially Protestant churches about relationships and relationship with God, and there's a deep insight there that's not going away just because we've reconceived things. But I want to move on from this only because we could talk about this every week, and maybe we'll come back to it. But because the second article this week is another one that's actually about this aversion to vulnerability, but it coincides perfectly. It's by Ruth Whipman, and she writes in the New York Times, "Everything is for sale now, even us." She says, almost everyone I know now has some kind of hustle, whether job or side or vanity project. Share my blog post, buy my book, click on my link, follow me on Instagram, visit my Etsy shop, donate to my Kickstarter, crowdfund my heart surgery. It's as though we are all working in Walmart on an endless Black Friday of the soul. Oh, what a line. Being sold to can be socially awkward for sure, but when it comes to corrosive self-doubt, being the seller is 1,000 times worse. The constant curation of a saleable self demanded by the new economy can be a special hellspring of anxiety. And what she's really talking about is the gig economy. The trick of selling yourself is doing it well is to act like you aren't doing it at all. As if this is simply how you like to unwind in the evening by sharing your views on pasta sauce with your 567,000 followers. Seeing the slick charm of successful online influencers spurs me to download e-courses on how to, quote, crack Instagram or, quote, develop my personal brand story. But as soon as I hand over my credit card details, I am flooded with vague self-disgust. I instantly abandon the courses and revert to my usual business model, badgering and guilting my friends across a range of online platforms, employing the personal brand story of, please. The sad truth is that many of us would probably make more money stacking shelves or working at the drive-thru than selling our quote-unquote thing. The real prize is deeper, more existential. What this is really about for many of us is a roaring black hole of psychological need. After a couple decades of constant advice to follow our passions and live our dreams, for a certain type of relatively privileged modern freelancer, nothing less than total self-actualization at work now seems enough. So we shackle our self-worth to the success of these projects. The book or blog post or range of crotcheted stuffed penguins becomes a proxy for our very soul. Ooh.
Hashtag seculosity.
Hashtag seculosity in many ways. Like, I've got to do this promotion. I feel like I'm haranguing.
Yeah. Pre-order.
Pre-order, by the way. I'm writing something about this piece because I found it so searing personally. But it's like, did I mention that I have a book for sale and that it actually is talking about these very dynamics? And yet, does that matter at all? No, not really. Because
so meta.
Please buy this thing because I am. It is a existential trial that is going on nonstop. In which Sarah, you talked about it when the preacher's self-worth is up for grabs in the pews every Sunday. In social media, all of a sudden, everyone has to become an evangelist for oneself, and none of us are actually that confident in what we're selling because we know ourselves, and so it becomes just a hellspring of anxiety, is what she says. Anyway, what did you guys think about this?
I read this piece yesterday by a priest that we work with, Jonathan Adams, and he talked so well actually about. I mean, her piece was not written from a Christian vantage point, but I feel this profoundly as a Christian about how he was preaching about grace to the congregation, but there was part of him that wondered if it was actually true for him. And he talked about the difference between being a sinner and being a failure. And that he knew that God redeemed sinners, but does God redeem failures too? And that kind of rings in me when I read this piece, because I can get on board with the sinner stuff, but our culture is so performance based. I mean, I cannot tell you how many days I wish I was some of the women I know in my life who are not on social media at all, who have like normal jobs where they're not, I mean, I love writing and I love preaching and I love these things, but it gets very muddled with like the promotional stuff and the worth stuff. And like, I have to remind myself, I mean, it was so powerful for me to read that yesterday from a colleague that like, God loves failures too, and he saves us from the need to side hustle for our worth,
I'm not that self-promotional. I think it's safe to say.
You're not.
No.
Yeah, no, you're not.
But I think I've been thinking about that.
You're an oversharer, but you're not self-promotional.
Well, thank you for that underhanded. I'm not even sure what that was. I tried to be affirming of myself for once, but thank you for saving me from that, Sarah Condon. No, that's exactly right. And I've beaten myself up a little bit about actually, I'm like, why don't you believe in yourself more? Like, why don't you put yourself out there more? Why don't you promote yourself more? And I think what it really boils down to is that it's not righteousness. It's fear, of course. It's like, because I'm pretty sure that if I tried to sell, no one would buy. And then I would know the truth. I would know the truth that I'm not actually worth anything, And I would much rather have someone, I need a hype man. I'd rather have someone hype me than hype myself. I'd rather someone like what I was doing because I just liked it, not because I told them to. But so I don't know. So this piece didn't hit me. Like I just can't imagine spending a lot of time on social media. Like, yes, I flip through Facebook every so often, but that's just not something that's enticing to me. But it's mainly, a lot of it is just, it's the same existential angst. It just manifests itself differently. It's not like I feel this need necessarily to justify my existence. It's more that I'm scared that my existence will be necessarily delegitimized, if I seek to self-promote. So anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I've been told I have to do this now. If you want to have a book out and you go through the trouble of it, it's not even worth doing.
It's like a first use of the law type thing. It's like, this is the way the world works.
This is just how it is.
You got to do it. Yep.
Either get on board or just don't write. And I sort of like, well, I don't know. You can be idealistic and you could say, well, it shouldn't be that way. So then I'm going to insist. It's interesting in thinking, though, because I was trying to think about when in writing about this yesterday, am I not self-promotional because I don't want to be narcissistic or self-involved, or am I like you, RJ? And the reason I'm not self-promotional is because I don't want to be rejected.
Yes.
And I don't want the judgment of the law. And probably a little. I mean, it's difficult because everyone's promoting something, and we're all. Are you promoting? If you're on the beach evangelizing people for Jesus, you're talking about that which is not you. But if you're promoting your book, even if it's talking about Jesus, you're promoting yourself. And so unless you're slightly narcissistic, that's why this current age, I think, is a playground for narcissists, because in order to thrive, you have to self-promote. In order to self-promote effectively, you actually have to believe, you have to have pure confidence in the product. And in order to have pure confidence in the product, which is you, or the message, which is you basically have to be deluded. And so it's, and that, you know,
I was
know
worried
that
about sounding judgmental, but you just trumped me so hard. Like, it was
I
amazing.
love it.
Well,
done.
I'm judging myself, I think that God has mercy on all of us. And the other thing is, it can actually be an act of faith, as anyone who's done any kind of evangelism knows, to say please, to put yourself out there, to be the supplicant,
Yes.
is to give up power.
Yes.
Is to be it is the Christian position. It is the, you know, we're on our knees at the Eucharist, you know, we're receiving, and that's where we actually are in life. And so it's something akin to faith, I think. That's the positive gloss I would put on it. In that but it's interesting that we're not willing to be a supplicant for love, but we are willing to be a supplicant for not just financial
Careerism.
reward, but ego and
Yeah.
enoughness. And that to me speaks volumes, and it kind of nails me to the wall, to a place where I actually am on my knees and saying, Lord, I really hope what you're saying about forgiveness is true.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I really do think about this like every day. And I was thinking about a piece that I wrote a couple of months back that got a very big response. I wrote it for a denominational publication, and it got a pretty big response, and a really angry response. You know, people used 4-letter words on the internet. People said that I would never get another church job.
Like hell.
But it was,
like hell.
hell yeah.
No, much worse. I was there.
like like the B word, which I am, but have not been called that on the internet. So yeah, 5 letters. So I sent it to my bishop, because I sent the piece to my bishop, and I just said, and I would say we have like a really good bishop, and he's very pastoral. And I sent it to him, and I was like, hey, I've gotten a lot of pretty people have loved this, and people have been really, really awful about this. And he sent me back this quote that a lot of people know if they've done Brene Brown's work about being the man in the arena, and that these are the people on the stands, and they have not put themselves out there, and they're in the arena. And also, like, as a Christian, I can't hear about being in an arena without thinking about Christians who were put into arenas. That very much popped into my brain.
You will die.
Yeah. And so I try not to like comfort myself with martyrdom. but I know that I know the feeling of when God has put something on my heart, and I can't not share it. I mean, I know that feeling, and I have kind of tried to let go. I mean, that's the best case scenario for me in this struggle, is to just let go of what the response is, right?
Yeah.
So
amen to that. And I think sometimes anyone who's involved in this kind of creative putting yourself in the arena thing it knows that feeling of inspiration, where something is flowing is the right word, but it's also you can't not say it, and it's that gets people in trouble, but it is a way that I think we use our gifts and all that stuff. So but I at the same time, reading this right before I have to go into this big cycle of self-promotion made me want to vomit. But
when are you going on
Crawl
cold
under a
air
rock.
and fresh air? That's what I want to know.
Exactly.
On cold air.
Exactly. That's Seculosity. Buy the book, pre-order, makes bestseller, right? See, I'm terrible at it. You guys, we're going to go from self-promotion to actually, hey, I just got the layouts, and they're pretty badass. I have to say, they've done an amazing job, and seeing
awesome.
it in laid out in a cool way is kind of cool. Let's go from that to something much, more, I guess, serious.
Yes, it's been a little light. Let's move into.
We really haven't talked about
material.
Let's talk about crying in the workplace.
Thank
again.
God. About time.
Sarah, we're going to end with something about accidentally killing someone. I shouldn't laugh, but that's what we're talking about. What
we are. So I opened up my my social media feed today, and it's not often that I open it up and see that I have a friend who has a piece in The Guardian, but that happened this morning. It's a guy named David Peters. He's actually a priest in our diocese. He's actually, I just found out this week, gonna do a church plant, which is amazing. But David is a veteran
Great idea.
of David's a veteran from the war in Iraq, and he wrote this piece. This was not what I expected David to write. He's written a lot about being a veteran. He's done a tremendous amount of work towards helping veterans. And he actually spoke at the Veterans Day service at my husband's church a few weeks back. So I've just sort of been around him recently. But anyway, this piece is not about that in a lot of ways. The title of it is What Happens to Your Life After You Accidentally Kill Someone. And David tells this very sad story about being a young man in college and getting into a car accident. And, he was sober and not driving fast, but got into a car accident that ended up killing this woman. And he writes so powerfully about sort of the things that have helped him through this. But he also says, which I think is a thing that anyone who has catastrophic sin in their lives, which if we're honest, we all do, but many of us have these very powerful moments. He talks about how that never leaves you. He is never not aware of the fact that this is in his history. So I just wanted to read this bit about sort of the night that it happened. He wrote, I went back to the dormitory that night. My roommate was there, shaken but not badly injured. I slept, and the next morning, the dean of men came to see me. I was still lying in bed. He pulled a chair up and opened his giant King James Bible. He read a passage from the Hebrew Bible about the mysterious cities of refuge, ancient safe havens for people who had accidentally killed someone. The perpetrator would flee the avenging family of the deceased, escape to a city of refuge, and live there until the Jewish high priest died. When the high priest died, accidental killers could go back to their homes, no longer at risk of revenge murder. And he talks about how he wasn't really sure why this was being read to him at that point, but goes on later to talk about in his own life how he has found these cities of refuge to deal with this terrible event in his history. So I thought it was an incredibly powerful piece.
Yeah, I think I actually wrote something about this a couple of years ago because it is so, there's a community. I mean, there's a couple online communities, I think, where people go to talk about this. And it's one of these, we talked about the difference between applied empathy and actual forgiveness. And this is a situation, where that we really run into the limits of forgiveness, but or at least we run into the limits of applied empathy. Well, by that I mean, usually when we're forgiving someone, we find a way to figure out, their psychological makeup, sort of, and their background. And if you really understood this about so and so, well, then you'd understand why they did what they did, and to kind of diminish the infraction, the transgression, the crime in some way by pointing to cultural circumstances, what have you. And that's actually wonderful, but it's empathy. It's not actual forgiveness. And so when my brother Simeon talks about this in his Lost Doctrine of Sin class, and he says that one of the difficulties in talking to modern people about sin is the idea that something can be out of your control and you can still be culpable for it. And in this case, you didn't intentionally mean to kill the person, and yet you were responsible. And what does that, it's, if you've got a terrible mental disorder and people say, well, they didn't choose that, therefore it's okay. But, if you're a parent and your depression causes you not to pay attention to your small children, I mean, there's still a real fallout from it. It's not morally neutral. And that's not to say you're not a victim, but what I'm trying to say is that the forgiveness, when we really talk about it, is not just forgiveness for things freely chosen. It's forgiveness that sort of understands that there are debts that a person cannot pay, and there are wounds that will never heal, and there are things out of our control that we are still seem to be culpable for. And this is an unfortunate and heart-wrenching example. But it should be shouted from the rooftops, I think, that with the bravery that David exhibits here, because this is the sort of, when we talk about sin and we talk about the forgiveness and the shed blood of Christ and all these things, this is what we're talking about, I think. And again, we come a lot of times on this podcast, I think, to the end of like the person's family may not be able to forgive him, and he may not be able to forgive himself. But we certainly point to a God whose forgiveness surpasses our understanding or our ability to internalize it in any way. That's my hope. I mean, Advent begins in the dark, right? Isn't that what they say?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of said this, but I hope that people don't read this and think, thank God I've never killed anyone accidentally. Because I think everyone kind of has. I mean, I think just by virtue of being in the world and, I mean, the environment, the plastic spoon I use every day for my yogurt. I mean, pick a thing that we're murdering accidentally, the blood diamonds I have on my hand, I mean, it actually is the weight of sin that we all carry. And in some ways we would be, I'll speak for myself personally. I am a much healthier Christian when I remember that, because it explains so much of the pain that I carry, right? It explains so much of it. And so, the last thing I want us to do is to read this and not see ourselves in David's story. Yeah. I mean, I think it is absolutely everyone's story on some level.
Yeah, and when the dean in that moment comes to him and reads that passage, but what he ends by saying, he says to his David, God has made a provision for you. And he said, I didn't understand at the time, but God has made provision for you. But God has made provision for you, dear listener, for me, in the midst of all of the things for which we are responsible but did not mean to do, or for the weight, the burden, the huge cost of sin. I don't know. God has made provision for you is the kind of the announcement of the angels. But RJ, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, the part of the article that really resonated with me and hit home was just these two sentences sort of towards the end. Is he says, my own religion, and he's great about sort of calling out this need in other religions, not just Judaism, but Native American religions, different rituals he's been a part of, and the fact that this is a universal human need. But he says, my own religion, Christianity, is no exception in the importance it places on themes of blood debt. A lot of Christians don't want to talk about that, but it's just true. Blood debt. Like, again, Brene Brown, she wants to be in a church where there's enough blood on the floor. Then he goes on to say, Christians regard Jesus Christ as having died for our sins, and liturgies and teachings about Christ's atonement on the cross often emphasize a cleansing of sin. This is the part I'll really remember, especially the kinds of sins and transgressions that are impossible to reconcile with a simple apology. And I think that goes to what you were saying, Sarah, that I think this is true for me sometimes. So much of the time when I'm in church, I'm thinking about, and we're doing the confession. I'm thinking about things that I said to my kids, things that I said to my wife, things that I didn't do, that I should have done, the homeless person I ignored, like things that are powerful and meaningful, but do kind of feel like they may be able to be reconciled with a simple apology, that I can go to my wife and say, God, I'm so sorry, or my kids and say, would you please forgive me? And even probably make an excuse, like I was tired or stressed out or something like that. But then that we do all have, whether we want to admit it or not, Sarah, like you talked about, and certainly if something doesn't come to mind that we've done, we've probably experienced something. I think about what you said, your therapist friend said that, the therapy business would end if parents of adult children could just learn to say they were sorry, there'd be no more therapists in the world. But that we all have things that just can't be reconciled, that we hold and we carry, and we need something bigger than ourselves. We need a word that's bigger than ourselves. We need someone to deal with that, because we just cannot bear that weight. And I think that's incredibly powerful, and something for, I think, preachers and Christians in particular to remember that when they look out on a congregation, they're meeting someone, that every single person carries something like that, even if they don't want to admit it or they're hiding from it. Because, of course, that's the natural response. It's like, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to look at it. I'm going to bury it somewhere. And yet, if it can be brought to the light and absolved and healed and washed away, like that is when real freedom and joy is found. And that should sort of be the goal, I think, of most Christian preaching and ministry and liturgy, and is to bring about that kind of existential release from the debts we cannot pay.
Yeah, and if that's impossible, then we have the kingdom come to, I think, to look forward to. I mean, I think it's the twinkling of an eye,
yes,
deliverance of eternity, which is really our hope. Not just in these momentary bits of release, which are powerful as and incredibly cathartic and important as they may be.
For me, this piece is so Advent worthy. I mean, I know that The Guardian wasn't like trying to put this out right before Advent started, but 90% of our lives we live in grave doubt that we will be forgiven for even the simplest of things. And we have these brief moments, these glimpses, David, as you said, where we realize, oh no, this is all true. And that's sort of what we cling to. And in Advent, I mean, if you're not reading Fleming's book, you're not in Advent. But her book is so clearly about, I'm great at promotion, so David should hire me. But her book is so clearly, about how it's not just that we're celebrating the birth of Jesus, it's that we know he came, so we know he will come back. And that's our hope. And that's where we know forgiveness reigns, right? So
the rights will be made wrong. I mean, someone said all heaven will go quiet as Cain and Abel embrace.
Oh my gosh!
And I think that's a beautiful picture of what we're talking about. I will say, as we close here, that last week we've speaking of Advent, we've relaunched Same Old Song, our lectionary podcast. If you are a preacher or anyone who has to deal with the lectionary, which is simply the assigned readings that go on a 3-year cycle in the Episcopal Church and many other Protestant denominations, check it out. You can find all the information on Mockingbird. It's in iTunes. Search Same Old Song. Aaron Zimmerman and Jacob Smith are doing a great job. It'll be every week on Tuesday, possibly Monday. But it also works as a great just sort of devotional, because those guys really know what they're talking about, and you will hear the thread of grace woven through the scriptures in a really beautiful way. But I hope the two of you have a wonderful beginning of Advent. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Dave. You too.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.